What's up YouTube and welcome back to my channel, and today you're here to learn about how to care for Panther Chameleons, and I don't blame you. They're beautiful and they're one of the most fascinating species in the hobby today. And before we go into the care guide, I want to talk about them a little bit. They're a species native to Madagascar, and they have a bunch of cool color patterns that are based off their region, aka localities. And for instance, some of them live near a city called Ambelobe, and those creatures right there will have a bunch of like rainbow colors. And then there's Nosy Bay that live on Nosy Bay Island, and they will be generally blue with a little bit of green and some red. And then there's Capes that are like candy cane colors, and then the list just goes on, and I just can't even name them all, but it's so freaking cool. It's kind of like Pokemon cards of them. Did you know Panther Chameleons, when they stick their tongue out to shoot at their prey, their tongue can get up to 1.5 times their body length from nose to vent. Another fun fact about Panther Chameleons is that they can change colors, but they don't change colors to blend in with their environment. That's always been completely false. Think of it more as a mood ring. A male would display fired up colors when they're mad and trying to be territorial, or try to impress a female when they're sleeping, stress colors, and that's how they change colors. It's just really a mood ring. Panther Chameleons are sexually dimorphic, and what that means is that you can tell a male and a female from their physical appearance. For instance, a female will display pink colors just about all the time, while the males are the ones that are colorful and can show different color patterns. Alright, let's get right into the care guide. Alright guys, we're going to go over 5 categories in this care guide. We're going to go over heating and lighting, water and humidity, Panther Chameleon diet, supplement and gut loading, enclosure and maintenance, and there's a couple other bonus categories, but you gotta stick around for that. Let's get right to it. Alright, for heating for your chameleons, you want your basking temps about 85 to 90 degrees. And I would say 85 degrees usually seems to be the sweet spot for my chameleons. And for your basking branch, you want it about like 6 to 8 inches away from the actual heat lamp, because otherwise you can possibly get a thermal burn on them. Then you gotta go to the vet, and nobody wants to do that. Your chameleons are gonna need to cool down throughout the day, so you want your ambient temps around lower 70s, around room temperature. Guys gotta remember, these guys are a tropical species and they're not a desert species. You don't want to fucking overheat them. For nighttime temp drops, you could totally do room temperature in the lower 70s, and even into the 60s will be okay. These guys are a little more resilient than you think they are to the cold. Chameleons need UVB, and for UVB, you want to give them the singular T5 bulb. You don't want to get them this compact bulb right here. This will not do. Even though they sell it in the Zoomed starter kits, which I call the chameleon death kits, it just doesn't produce enough UVB. And what happens is, when the chameleon doesn't get enough UVB, it'll get something called metabolic bone disease, or for short, MBD. And what that is, it's a calcium deficiency throughout their bone structure. You'll see them getting like warped in their spines, and their elbows won't be straight like this. They'll go all curved, and you don't want that, dude. I mean, imagine if you had messed up bones. So make sure you get a T5 singular tube UVB light fixture. And the brands I would recommend is the Zoomed with the T5 Reptisun 10.0 or the Arcadia 6%. Alright, now we're at water and humidity. Chameleons don't recognize still water, so they don't really ever drink out of a water dish. How chameleons recognize water is like dewdrops in the morning or rainfall. And in captivity, we can provide water through an automated misting system, a hand mister, a dripper, or a fogger. I personally myself like to use an automated misting system because it makes my life so much easier. I want to say that this is a crucial topic, so please pay attention here real carefully. Alright, so in the wild, humidity works for chameleons. It's usually higher in the morning, as it's usually foggy up, and then during the day, as the sun comes out, humidity goes down, and when nighttime comes, it goes back up. So we want to replicate that as much as we can. So what happens if in captivity we keep having high humidity without proper ventilation throughout the midday? Well, the high heat will combine with the humidity and then create bacteria, and the chameleon will breathe in that bacteria and get something called respiratory infection. If you get a respiratory infection, please take your chameleon immediately to the vet, as a respiratory infection can kill your chameleon. Signs of respiratory infection include wheezing, gaping, looking up at the stars with their mouth wide open, and bubbling out of the mouth. And respiratory infection happens a lot in captivity because people get this mindset that chameleons are amphibians, that it has to be consistently high humidity. And to be honest, it truly doesn't. I usually keep my humidity up around like 60%, and even if it goes lower to like 50 or even upper 40s during the midday, I don't even really mind and bother with it because they'll be okay. And if you want to avoid respiratory infection, I promise you, if you follow my schedule, you can really avoid it with proper ventilation as well. I usually mist my chameleons first thing in the morning and then 30 minutes before lights out. And if you want to provide water during midday, you can use a water dripper. Let's say you grab a cup and just poke a hole into it and let it drip on the leaves. That's okay during the midday, because as that water drips down, it's not spraying in the air and causing all this bacteria going through the air. Alright, now we're in Panther Chameleon diet. And Panther Chameleons, just like humans, thrive on a varied diet. And Panther Chameleons are strictly insectivores, and their main staple is going to be crickets and dubia roaches, but they can also eat such things as blue bottle houseflies, soldier flies, superworms, waxworms, hornworms, silkworms, and varied more. There's a chart in my actual website down below. And also, when it comes to worms, like such as superworms and waxworms, you don't want to feed those too much to your chameleon, because they are like cheeseburgers to them. You know, like if we eat too many cheeseburgers, we get fat. Same thing with them. And I also notice from my experience, chameleons can get addicted to them, and then they'll get spoiled and only want to eat those, and then you have to like make them go on a hunger strike, and nobody wants to do that to get them back to eating crickets. You're wondering to yourself, how often and how much should I feed my chameleon? Well, from juveniles to subadults, I feed my chameleons every day then, and usually I let them eat as much as I can. Let's just say from a cricket count, about 15 to 20 a day. But when they become adults, their metabolism actually slows down. When they eat more crickets, they'll start gaining weight easier, so they don't just burn off that fat as much. So usually for my adults, I feed them about every 3 days of full meals, and then I'll feed them treats every 2 days. For instance, after a meal day, I won't feed them the next day, and then the day after that, I'll give them like 2 superworms, and then I'll give them another full meal. And that actually works out perfectly for me. And how can you tell a chameleon's fat and obese? Well, you can actually tell by their casque. Their casque will have a bunch of puffiness right there. And for example, here's a chameleon that I took in recently as a surrender, and it came in really overweight. You can tell by the puffiness on the casque right there. This chameleon was only really fed superworms, as I can tell, but I'm going to get it back on track. When will you know your chameleon's going to slow down on their feeding? Well, they kind of usually tell you that when they're slowing down, but for my males, I've noticed that it's usually around like 9 to 10 months that I start slowing down their feeding. And for females, I notice females sexually mature faster, so I usually do around 7 to 8 months for them. Also, I want to mention how you know what cricket size or feeder size to feed your chameleons. A good rule of thumb is usually the insect fits in between the distance of their eyes. Alright, supplementation and gut loading. So you're going to want to dust every feeding with calcium without D3. And calcium goes hand in hand with UVB lighting. Like how I was saying earlier, chameleons need the UVB lighting to process calcium. That's where the dusting your feeders comes in. And you don't want to dust your feeders in snow white, as too much calcium can be bad. Too much of anything could be bad for them. So just like us, chameleons need vitamins throughout them, such as vitamin A and vitamin D3. And there's a product that I use called Repashys Calcium Plus, and that's a 2-in-1 product. And for my dusting schedule for that, I do the 1st of every month and the 16th of every month. So 2 times a month. And why it's important for chameleons to get vitamin A? Well, if you see your chameleon sleeping throughout the day with its eyes closed, that's not a good sign. That's a deficiency of vitamin A. Another supplement you can use is called bee pollen. And bee pollen is actually another great source of vitamin A. And in the wild, it's usually found on just like covered on bumblebees, beetles, and that's how the chameleon usually get their vitamin A. What is gut loading? Well, gut loading means feeding your feeders 24 hours before feeding it to your chameleon. As gut loading your feeders with nutritious food will actually enrichen the chameleon's health. You can use such things to gut load your crickets with is carrots, kale, mustard greens, and bee pollen, and there's a whole chart of what to use and what not to use for gut loading. I mainly just gut load my feeders with just baby carrots. That's a good source of vitamin A, and it's also, the baby carrots have a lot of moisture in them, so I'm rehydrating them and feeding them at the same time. Alright guys, now we're in chameleon habitat. And I'm going to recommend a screened enclosure. Remember how I was saying earlier that ventilation is key? Well, that's where the screened enclosure comes from. And for the adult males, you're going to want a 2 foot by 2 foot by 4 foot tall. And for the females, since they're smaller, I'm going to recommend an 18 by 18 by 36 inches tall. And brands I totally recommend are the Zoomed Uvb and the Exo Terras. Personally, for my adult males, I prefer Exo Terras. The reason why is because they have an 18 inches deep, 36 inches wide, and 3 feet tall screen cage, and that works better for me because my adult males, I've noticed they like to run back and forth more than anything. And I noticed in the 4 foot tall cages, they just don't really use that last bottom foot that much. Can you cohabitate chameleons together? The answer is a solid no. And I mean no. Males are territorial and they will try to fight and kill each other. And you can't cohab a female or a male, as a male will always try to consistently breed with the female, and that's going to cause stress on the female and shorter her lifespan. And either way, females can fight back towards the male. Alright, for your enclosure, you're going to want to have a bunch of foliage. Remember, chameleons are a tree-dwelling species, and they also love shade a lot, and they need somewhere to retreat to when they feel scared. Plants that I use are umbrella tree, pothos, mass cane, ficus tree, majesty palm. There's a bunch of plants that you can use that are safe for your chameleon. But the plants that I recommend the most is the umbrella tree and the pothos. Umbrella tree's really hardy, it provides a bunch of foliage, and your chameleon can drink water really well off the leaves. And pothos, those grow pretty fast and they can climb onto that, and that's a really cool looking thing when they do. Also, I want to mention, please don't use fake plastic plants, because as water gets sprayed onto them and it dries up, it just makes a bacteria breeding ground, and it stinks. Trust me, it stinks. And remember how I said a clean enclosure and bacteria free. Also, you should have a bunch of branches and vines throughout the enclosure for your chameleon to actually like walk onto and climb onto. I recommend sizes that are about the width of the body and a little bit smaller. What about substrate? For substrate, I personally don't use substrate because it can become a bacteria breeding ground, and if your chameleon tries to eat a bug off the ground and eat some of that dirt with it, they can become impacted and can possibly kill them. The smell of it's really bad too, and it's also just much easier to clean. Alright, let's go over to maintenance. Maintenance is pretty straightforward. All you're going to want to do is just spot clean of the poop, the dead bugs, dead leaves, and you don't want to have pools of water sitting in the bottom of your cage, especially with like poop and dead bugs in there. That's how bacteria grows, and that can possibly like make parasites come into the cage. So males and females are virtually the same when it comes to care, except for the female can lay eggs without a male, but they'll be infertile. When I say infertile, I mean that they'll be bad and they won't hatch. And signs when they're gravid with these infertile eggs will consist of black markings, as you're seeing right here. And another sign of when they're about to lay their eggs is they're going to be walking around the bottom of the enclosure for a little bit, and they won't eat food at all for a few days. And when you make this lay bin for them, you're going to want it to consist of 50-50 of organic potting soil and play sand. And as she's getting ready to lay these eggs, make sure to give her a bunch of privacy, because it's actually really important that they have privacy for this. Also, I'll leave a video link in the comments below how I make a lay bin for my females. Alright, let's go to handling your chameleon. So, I want to say that chameleons are more of a solitary creature and they don't really like human interaction. They're more of a display creature, but you can handle them. And when you come to handle them, never come at them quick and fast, and never reach from them above. They'll see that as a sign of attack, and they might try to bite you then, depending on their trust level with you. Instead, think of it more as a bird. You know, you slowly come under your chameleon with your hand, lightly coax them onto your hand, and as they get further onto your hand, slowly come out of the cage with them, and just let them perch on you. It's just that simple, like a bird. Alright, let's go to taming your chameleon. So chameleons are generally frightened due to their solitary lifestyle, but with their paranoia, they've been able to survive for thousands of years. And my best way of taming a chameleon is by practicing hand feeding daily. I mean, food is the way to the heart, right? And eventually, once the chameleon starts eating out of your hand, then you're building some trust. And eventually, the chameleon might even crawl out of their cage to go on your hand, completely trusting you, and it's a completely rewarding feeling once you get there. It takes a lot of time and patience, but you can get there. Also, another way that you can practice too on building trust is like when you're doing cage maintenance, just slowly just go in there, don't move too fast as you pick up their poop and stuff, and then they'll slowly get used to you and adjust. Out of the dozens of chameleons I've raised from child to adulthood, I haven't been able to tame one of them. Chameleons all have their own personalities too, and I believe with practicing that you can tame a chameleon too, and it's one of the most rewarding feelings ever. And when it comes to researching chameleons, you should always try to find research from multiple sources. And even though you're watching this video right here, I recommend you still try to find other information. Maybe you'll find some better info from other breeders. And another great source of information I would recommend is checking out the Chameleon Academy. They have podcasts and all that good stuff you want to learn more. Alright, let's go over how to shop for your chameleon. Never buy them from a chain pet store, as they just don't take care of the chameleons well, and they'll give you wrong information and sell you the wrong products, and in the end it's just complete heartbreak. Instead, I recommend going through a reputable breeder. And what's reputable is, in my opinion, they have a few years of breeding under their belt, they don't buy chameleons and resell them for more, and they have social media pages, and they have reviews, so check that out. And if I had to recommend one other breeder, I would recommend Camouflage Creations, as they are the hands down the best in the business, and you can't go wrong with them. Alright guys, that wraps up my care guide video on Panther Chameleons, and if you got some value out of this, please hit that like and subscribe button down below, and best of all, share with your friends. It takes me a long time to make these kind of videos, through all the editing, the b-roll, and most of all the years of experience it took me of trial and error to get to this point. So it would mean the world to me if you would do that, and especially share with your friends. My name's Ryan, you're watching Mighty Morphin Reptiles.